June 4th, 1942. The Pacific Ocean, north of Midway et al. The time is exactly 7:10 in the morning. If you could hover just a few dozen feet above the waves at that precise moment, you would witness one of the most insane scenes. This is not a Hollywood special effect. This is not a scripted scene from a video game. It is the visceral reality of steel clashing. A battered American B-26 Marauder bomber, trailing thick black smoke and shedding shreds of metal, is charging like a maddened bull. It is moving at a suicidal speed of over 280 miles per hour, heading straight for the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy. It is flying too low. How low? Low enough that the prop wash from its engines is carving a deep trench into the ocean surface. Low enough that its belly threatens to scrape the paint off the Japanese carrier flight deck. Low enough that Vice Admiral Nagumo can see. He can actually see the bloodshot eyes and the sheer determination behind the goggles of the American pilot in the cockpit. In that frozen fraction of a second, thousands of highly trained Japanese sailors on the Akagi forget to breathe. They are gripping anti-aircraft guns capable of shredding any aircraft, yet they dare not pull the triggers. Because this massive bomber is slicing into their defensive circle like a scalpel, hugging them so tightly that firing a single shot would be fatal. It would mean blasting their own bridge, killing their own commander, and detonating their own fueled aircraft on the deck. This is a gamble with the highest stakes imaginable. The wager is the lives of 7 young men. The odds of winning are practically zero. The man at the controls is a 23-year-old first lieutenant named James Muri. The plane is known as the Widowmaker. This is the story of aircraft number 40-1391, christened by its crew as Susie Q. It is the story of how a medium bomber never designed for this charged straight into the face of death. This is not just a story about courage, it is an epic about how human flesh and blood under extreme pressure stood against a torrent of steel. To truly understand the weight of this moment, we must rewind the clock a few hours. It is the early summer of 1942. A suffocating despair hangs over the Pacific theater. Smoke from Pearl Harbor has barely cleared, and the Japanese Imperial War Machine is at its zenith. This time, they have assembled a force of terrifying magnitude. For heavy aircraft carriers, Akagi so are unthinkable. They are like for floating volcanoes guarded by 2 mountain-like battleships, 3 heavy cruisers, and 11 destroyers. They are moving like a spear tip thrusting straight toward the heart of Midway. This is the famous Guido, but I the mobile force commanded by the very man who orchestrated the Pearl Harbor attack Nagumo. In his hands, he holds the most powerful naval air arm in the world. Hundreds of Zero fighters, Val-I bombers, and Cape torpedo bombers are prepped and ready to turn Midway into a dead island. Waiting for them on the other side is a patchwork, almost pitiful defensive force. And among them is our protagonist, Lieutenant James Muri and his B-26 bomber squadron. Let us take a moment to look at this machine, the Widowmaker. This is absolutely not a platform designed for torpedo attacks. The B-26 Marauder was built for high-altitude, high-speed level bombing. It is a beast powered by 2 massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp engines, each cranking out to 1,000 horsepower. To achieve top speed, its wings were designed to be incredibly short, resulting in a wing loading of 53 pounds per square foot. What does that mean? It means it has to fly fast to stay in the air. Its landing speed is a blistering 150 miles per hour. It handles like a brick with wings. If a pilot loses focus for a second, or if the airspeed drops, the plane drops out of the sky like a stone. There is no recovery. In training, this plane killed more American pilots than the enemy did. And yet, in a move of desperation due to a lack of specialized aircraft, the American brass decided to strap a 2,000-pound Mark 13 aerial torpedo to the belly of this beast. It was like asking a Formula One car to tow a freight train, absurd and deadly. No one had taught Muri or his crew how to do this. There were no textbooks, no tactical manuals. Just a cold order: take this 1-ton block of iron fly to sea level charge into the densest anti-aircraft fire on Earth and drop it on a carrier. Muri crew consisted of 7 men. Beside him was co-pilots, 2nd Lieutenant Pren, more a steady southerner, Bombardier 2nd Lieutenant Russell Johnson, who earlier that morning had complained about the bitter coffee, plus an navigator gunners and a radio operator. The average age of these 7 men was barely over 20. Before this morning, they had never seen the Japanese fleet. They had never dropped a live torpedo against a moving warship. Their only experience was a few practice runs against wooden targets. That was it. 7 rookies, a flying cough, an untested torpedo going up against the elite of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At 6 in the morning, the air raid sirens on Midway shattered the silence. The sound was shrill like a bad omen. Muri watched the ground crew working around his plane, the massive torpedo hanging underneath, gleaming with a cold metallic shine. The faces of the crew were grim. No one spoke. Everyone knew the math was cruel. Just 3 hours earlier, a flight of Navy T-BF Avenger torpedo bombers had tried to attack this fleet. The result: carnage. Out of 6 planes, 5 were shot down. Only 1 returned shattered. The ocean is a greedy mouth, and it had swallowed their courage and their blood. Muri did not know the specific numbers, but he could feel the tragic heaviness in the air. The engines roared to life. The R-2800s shook the very bones of the men inside. Her modified B-26s, led by Captain James Collins, wobbled toward the end of the runway. The planes were overweight. With the torpedo and full fuel takeoff was a struggle against gravity. Muri stood on the brakes, revving the throttles until the airframe shuddered violently, threatening to tear itself apart. Susie Q began to roll, faster and faster. The runway blurred. The wings sliced the air with a high-pitched scream. At the very end of the tarmac, Muri pulled back on the yoke. The heavy machine reluctantly left the earth, its landing gear retracting just as they scraped over the seawall. They were airborne. The ocean below was calm like blue silk, but that peace did not last. As they climbed to 12,000 feet and punched through a thin layer of clouds, the sight before them stopped their hearts. On the horizon, Nagumo fleet appeared. It was not just a few ships, it was a floating city of steel. Black smoke from dozens of warships obscured half the sky. The flight decks of the carriers were packed with aircraft. And swarming above this juggernaut were at least 30 Japanese Eurofighters. The Zero was the ruler of the Pacific skies, lightweight, agile, heavily armed, and capable of turning on a dime. Against them, the lumbering B-26 was like a clumsy water buffalo stumbling into a pack of wolves. Almost the instant the American bombers appeared, the Zeros spotted their prey. Like sharks smelling blood, they rolled over and dove from high altitude. The sunlight glinted off the red rising sun, insignias on their wings flashing a signal of death. Bandit 6 o'clock swarms of them, tail gunner Private Tashley voice crackled over the radio, terror barely suppressed. Before Muri could even give an order, the slaughter began. There was no probing, no warning. Several Zeros latched on to Captain Collins, led B-26. Tracers from their 20mm cannons whipped against Collins' fuselage like lashes of fire. Aluminum ripped away, sparks flew. Muri watched his friend plane shudder, violently trying to shake the pursuers with a hard left turn. But against a Zero, such maneuvers were futile. More Japanese fighters joined the hunt. "We cannot stay," he writ a dead, and Muri yelled. As a pilot, he knew instinctively that dogfighting Zeros at 12,000 feet was suicide. B-26 had only two advantages: speed and structural toughness. Hang on, Muri slammed the yoke forward. The massive twin-engine bomber dipped its nose and began a dive steep enough to tear the wings off. G-forces pinned the crew into their seats. Vision blurred. Ears popped painfully from the rapid pressure change. The altimeter spun wildly 10,000 feet, 8,000, 5,000. The ocean in the windshield grew terrifyingly large, shifting from blue to a deep, menacing black. The roar of the engines turned into a high-pitched scream, protesting the abuse. 3,000 feet. 1,000. 500. Muri did not pull up. He was gambling that the Japanese anti-aircraft guns could not form an effective net at this altitude. Gambling that the Zero pilots would not dare follow him this low. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. This was the true nature of the Marauder. Muri finally leveled the plane out. They were now flying less than 50 feet above the water. The massive propellers were kicking up white sprays, alt water mixing with the wind to coat the windshield. But the Japanese did not let them go. The Zeros clung to them like parasites. They did not dare fly as low as the B-26, but they hovered just above and behind, raining fire down upon Susie Q. Thud, thud, the sickening sound of bullets punching through the fuselage echoed inside. Every impact felt like a hammer blow to the chest. The cabin instantly filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, burning hydraulic fluid and the metallic tang of warm blood. "I am hit, sir." My leg scream came from the tail turret. It was Private Ashley. But the firing did not stop. The twin 50 caliber machine guns continued to spit flame backward. This was the entrance to hell, and Muri target the Akagi was 2 miles ahead, looming like an insurmountable mountain, coldly watching this approaching gnat. Range 3,000 yards. The fleet anti-aircraft fire opened up. Have you ever seen a volcano erupt? That is what the air around the Akagi looked like. It was not just a few guns. It was the entire fleet. Hundreds of anti-aircraft guns, autocannons, and machine guns from dozens of ships firing at a single point. The sky was filled with black clouds from exploding 25mm shells. Tracers red, yellow, green wove a suffocating web of light around Susie Q. The sea boiled with explosions, sending up walls of water. Muri flew the plane as if threading a needle through these water walls and curtains of steel. Could not pull up, that was death. He could not turn, that would expose the plane's soft belly. He could only go forward, straight into the teeth of it. How much longer? Muri shouted. Sweat soaked his flight suit and ran into his eyes, but he did not dare blink. Range 2,000 yards, still correcting. Bombardier Johnson was prone in the transparent plexiglass, nose, his voice hoarse. His view was not of scenery, but of flying death. In that position, he was the most exposed man on the plane, but he had to stay calm. He had to stare into the bomb sight. Suddenly, a violent shudder rocked the plane. It was the sound of the wingman dying. Muri caught a glimpse out of the corner of his eye. The B-26 to his right had its wing sheared off by a large caliber shell. The plane instantly lost equilibrium, tumbling like a broken kite before slamming into the sea in a massive ball of fire. There was absolutely no time for grief on that plane. There was truly not even any time for fear to take a hold of them. Range 1,000 yards. Steady. Johnson was screaming now as the massive target loomed larger in the glass nose. The Akagi now filled the entire windshield as the bomber roared closer to the heart of the Japanese Imperial flagship. Muri could see the rivets on the hull and the dark muzzles of the guns on the deck edge, spitting fire at his aircraft. At this range, the heavy flak guns could not track them, but the smaller rapid-fire cannons became even more ferocious. The sound of bullets hitting the plane changed from a thud to a ripping sound, like a heavy canvas being torn apart. That was the sound of the aluminum skin being shredded by hundreds of rounds of high-velocity enemy machine gun fire. The glass of the instrument panel shattered in shards of sharp glass cut into Muri's cheek, but he felt absolutely no pain. His entire universe had shrunk to the reticle of the sight and the gray steel monster waiting directly in front of him. Bombs away. Now, with Johnson roar, he slammed the red release, but to drop the 1-ton torpedo into the ocean waves. The aircraft suddenly lurched upward as it was relieved of the heavy burden while the torpedo dropped into the sea. Standard torpedo tactics dictated that the aircraft should make a hard turn away to escape towards the open ocean waters. That was the rulebook for survival, but the environment around them had turned into a literal meat grinder of steel. To the left was a wall of fire from destroyers, and to the right was the deadly crossfire of carriers and battleships. But in that split-second, Muri looked ahead and made a decision that defied every single rule in the pilot tactical manual. Left or right, it was a meat grinder. There seemed to be only one path: death. But in the abyss of despair, a thought, insane and absolute, exploded in his mind. I thought that defied tactics, defied physics, defied the instinct to survive. What if we do not turn? What if we do not run? What if we go straight through? Muri gritted his teeth so hard they nearly cracked. His hands gripped the yoke in a deathlock. He did not bank left. He did not bank right. He pulled back, hard. Hang on, we are going over. The massive B-26 did not turn to flee as the Japanese expected. Instead, like a dragon provoked beyond reason, it reared its head and aimed straight for the flight deck of the Akagi. Muri knuckles were white. The nose of the bomber pitched up in the 15-ton, metal bestrode over the bow of the carrier. It cleared the edge by mere feet. It was an absurdist nightmare. This was not an evasion, it was an insult to the Imperial Navy. Muri plane, trailing black smoke, was effectively riding the Japanese flagship. He was flying lower than the island's superstructure. As the bomber swept down the 800-foot flight deck, it blocked out the sun, casting a terrified shadow over the Japanese crew below. Time dilated. On the bridge, Admiral Nagumo, the Conqueror, stood frozen like a statue. He stared wide-eyed as the twin-engine bomber thundered past his window. And then the strangest thing happened. The deafening roar of the Japanese anti-aircraft guns stopped. Silence fell over the ship defenses. Why? Because the Japanese gunners realized with horror that the American plane was in their blind spot. If they fired now, every 25mm shell would tear through their own bridge, kill their own admiral, and blow up their own fueled aircraft on the deck. In the center of the fiercest naval battle in history, a vacuum of silence formed, filled only by the roar of the R-2800 engines and the chopping sound of propellers. But this was not peace. It was a different kind of slaughter. Muri crew did not waste the moment. Though the Japanese could not fire, the B-26 was bristling with guns. Top turret gunner Sergeant Go-Go J and tail gunner Private Tashley, despite their wounds, clamped down on their triggers. Hit them hard. The .50 caliber heavy machine guns swept the deck of the Akagi like scythes. Japanese sailors and pilots who had looked up in shock were cut down by the heavy rounds. Splinters flew from the wooden deck, blood sprayed. 20 pilots attempting to scramble to their planes to intercept were killed instantly in their cockpits, their canopies shattered before they could even start their engines. It happened too fast. From bow to stern, the transit took less than 10 seconds. But for the Japanese, it was 10 seconds of humiliation. For Muri, it was 10 seconds of dancing with the devil. As Susie Q screamed off the stern of the Akagi and dropped back toward the water, the shield vanished. The Japanese guns, silent for those few moments, erupted again, with redoubled fury fueled by shame and rage. Get down, Muri shoved the yoke forward. The plane dropped like a stone, hugging the waves to hide in the raid arc lutter. But the real nightmare was just beginning. The Zeros, which had held their fire to avoid hitting their own ship, now swarmed like angry wasps. They dove from above, slashed from the sides, and sat on Muri tail, determined to shred the American plane that had just insulted their flagship. Thud, rip, bang, the cabin filled with the sound of metal tearing. Left engine fire on the left engine. Co-pilot Moore screamed, despair creeping into his voice. Muri looked. The left Pratt & Whitney was belching black smoke and flames. The RPM gauge spun wildly and dropped to zero. Oil pressure was gone. The engine was dead. Over a hostile ocean surrounded by the enemy, losing half your power meant the heavy bomber was now a cripple. Speed dropped. Altitude dropped. Jettison everything now, Muri roared. The crew began frantically tearing everything loose and throwing it out the hatches. ammo boxes, radio equipment, even their flak vests and life raft into the sea. Every kilogram was a death sentence. But it was not enough. Jaro bullets pierced the radio room, starting a fire. Corporal Mello, the radio operator, with only one good hand, the other arm useless, grabbed a fire extinguisher, fighting the flames and the choking smoke, while trying to fire his waist gun with his remaining hand. His face was a mask of blood and soot, but he kept fighting. The altimeter read 10 feet. 3 meters off the water, the spray was hitting the belly. Muri did not dare bank the wings. If a winged pip touched a wave, they would cartwheel and disintegrate. This was true nap of the earth flying. Not for show, but for survival. The Zeros could not fly this low, forcing them to fire from higher angles, which gave Muri a sliver of a chance. But he had to wrestle with the remaining right engine. It was overheating, the temperature gauge pegged in the red, screaming as it dragged the bullet-riddled carcass of the plane toward Midway. 150 miles, a 30-minute flight normally. Now, it was a marathon through hell. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the straining engine. Every vibration felt like the end. Tail gunner Ashley lay in a pool of blood, tourniquet on his leg, staring blankly at the receding horizon. An hour passed. They listened to the airframe groaning. They watched the fuel gauge drift toward empty. Finally, a blur on the horizon. Midway. Home. But fate had one more cruel joke. Prepare for landing, Muri ordered. Sir, hydraulic pressure is 0 more, said, tapping the gauge. No hydraulics meant no brakes, no flaps, and no landing gear. They had to hand crank the wheels down. In the cramped, bouncing, blood-smelling cockpit, this was a job for 2 strong men over several minutes. They had seconds, and they were exhausted. Crank it, or we die. Moore and Johnson threw themselves at the emergency handle. 1 turn to turns 3. Muscles spazzed, wounds reopened, sweat and blood dripped onto the floor. Main gear locked. Nose gear, the nose gear is stuck. It is only halfway down. It was too late. The runway was right there, and to make matters worse, Muri saw through the side window that the left main tire had been blown off in the attack. Nothing remained but a bare metal rim. Imagine this. A heavy Bomber 1 engine dead, no flaps to slow down, no brakes to stop, a nose wheel dangling uselessly at a missing tire. They were going to hit the ground at 150 miles per hour. Brace for impact. Muri took a breath, perhaps his last. With a touch as delicate as a surgeon, he guided the wreck down, keeping the weight on the one good tire for as long as possible. Screech. The sound of rubber burning instantly turned into the terrifying shriek of metal grinding on concrete. The plane lurched violently to the left. The bare rim bit into the runway, carving a trail of sparks like a dragon breathing fire. Then the stuck nose gear snapped with a sickening crack. The nose of the B-26 smashed into the ground. The plane slid, scraping and tearing, a beast with its legs cut off. Dust billowed. Debris flew. The inertia slammed the men against their straps, cracking ribs. After sliding 400 yards, amidst a cloud of choking dust, the pile of scrap metal finally came to a halt. Dead silence. No engines. No guns. Just the ticking of cooling metal and the distant sound of waves. A few seconds later, the side hatch was kicked open. Bloody, tattered, looking like zombies rising from the grave, the crew stumbled out, holding each other up. Ambulances and fire trucks raced toward them. But when the ground crews arrived, they stopped cold. They stared in disbelief. This was not a plane. It was a sieve. The fuselage was so riddled with holes you could see the blue sky through it. The propeller blades were chewed up like jagged teeth. The left engine was a hollow, burnt-out shell. A master sergeant walked up with a piece of chalk to count the battle damage. 1 to 3. At 200 he stopped. It was pointless. There were over 500 bullet holes in Susie Q. The fuselage was bent. The main spar was cracked. The plane had taken a beating that should have disintegrated at mid-air, but it brought them home. Muri and his crew were pulled from the wreckage. They were alive. Shaken, deafened, and bleeding, but alive. But the story of Susie Q did not end with its landing. Its suicidal charge had a ripple effect that changed history. Because Nagumo had seen the American bomber fly inches over his head, the Japanese commander was gripped by fear. The illusion that the American land-based air power was neutralized was shattered instantly. Minutes after Muri flew away, a shaken Nagumo made the fatal decision to ray-arm his planes. He ordered the planes on his decks, armed with torpedoes, to attack American ships, to be ray-armed with bombs, to strike the airfield again to destroy threats like Muri. It was during this chaotic, frantic ray-arming window, the famous fatal 5 minutes with bombs and torpedoes stacked on the decks, that the American SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrived. They fell out of the sky like avenging angels. The rest is history. The destruction of the Imperial fleet. Turning of the tide. But for Muri, that day was not about strategy. It was about survival. It was about 500 holes, the blood of his brothers, and a plane that would never fly again. Susie Q was written off, scrapped. It had given its life. Muri and his crew received medals. But many of them never flew in combat again. Those few minutes had consumed a lifetime's worth of luck. When we look back at history, we remember the sinking ships. But we must not forget men like James Muri, who took a machine that did not belong there, who flew into a situation that could not be survived and through sheer audacity cracked open the door for victory. This is the story of Susie Q, the bomber that buzzed a carrier. The legend written in 500 bullet holes. If you want to see more insane acts of bravery that defied the odds, destroyed that but unjust like Muri destroyed the Japanese defense. I am your strategy observer. I will see you in the next briefing.